The Widow's Rifle, Part 1. You ever wonder what you'd do if you came across a woman tied to a tree, wolves closing in, and you knew that saving her would bring death right to your doorstep? That's the choice Ezra Blackwood faced on a frozen December evening in 1873, high in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. This is the story of what happened next. The sun was dying behind Clingman's Dome, bleeding orange and purple across a sky that promised more snow by midnight. The temperature had already dropped to 5 degrees below freezing, and the wind carried that particular bite that gets into your bones and stays there. Ezra Blackwood was working his trap line along the old Cherokee Trail, a path he'd walked 1,000 times in the 4 years since he'd buried his wife Sarah and the child that never drew breath. He was a big man, Ezra, shoulders broad as an axe handle, hands scarred from timber work and rough living. His beard grew thick and tangled, more rust than brown, and his hair hung past his collar in waves he rarely bothered to trim. At 39, he looked older. Grief does that. So does living alone on a mountain where your only conversations are with your horse and the wind. He was checking the last trap of the day, his mind on getting back to the cabin before full dark, when he heard them. Wolves. But not the usual hunting calls that echoed through these mountains on winter nights. These were different, urgent, frenzied. The kind of sounds wolves make when they've cornered something and they know the kill is close. Ezra straightened up, one hand going instinctively to the Sharp's rifle slung across his back. He stood there in the fading light, listening. The calls were coming from down in the hollow, maybe 200 yards northwest. He could walk away. Should walk away. A man who lives alone survives by minding his own business and not getting tangled up in things that aren't his concern. But then he saw her. At first, he thought it was a scarecrow, some hunter's marker or a trick of the shadows. But as his eyes adjusted, focused through the gloom and distance, he saw the truth. A woman, tied upright to the trunk of an ancient white pine that stood alone on a rocky outcrop. Her arms were bound above her head, her legs tied close together at the ankles. She wore a deerskin dress, torn at the shoulder, and her long black hair moved in the wind like a living thing. And the wolves were circling. 4 of them. But something was wrong with these wolves. Their heads were broader, more mastiff-like than pure wolf. Their eyes glowed wrong in the fading light, too close together. Wolf-dog hybrids, crossbreeds that some fool had let loose years ago, or worse, that someone had driven here deliberately. They moved with none of the natural caution of wild wolves. These were animals that had tasted easy prey before. They were taking their time, testing how close they could get, and Ezra knew in his gut that someone had set them on her trail, someone who wanted to make certain she died. The woman wasn't screaming. That's what struck Ezra hardest. Most people would be hollering their lungs out, begging for mercy from God or man or anything that might listen. But this woman stood straight, her chin up, watching the wolves with the kind of steady gaze you see in soldiers before a battle. Ezra made his decision in less than 10 seconds. Later he'd wonder if it was really a choice at all, or if something deeper had decided for him. 4 years ago, he hadn't been able to save Sarah when the fever took her during childbirth. He'd held her hand and watched her slip away while the doctor shook his head and said there was nothing to be done. That helpless feeling had carved something out of him, left a hollow space where his heart used to be. Maybe fate was giving him a second chance. Maybe he was just too stubborn to watch another person die when he had the power to stop it. He moved fast for a big man. Down the slope, using the trees for cover, closing the distance. The lead wolf, a gray monster with a scarred muzzle, sensed him first. Its head snapped around, lips pulling back from yellow teeth. Ezra brought the Sharps up smooth and steady. He'd been shooting since he was 10 years old, and a rifle felt as natural in his hands as breathing. The shot cracked across the hollow like a thunderclap. The lead wolf dropped mid-stride, dead before it hit the ground. The other 3 scattered, then regrouped, their attention now split between the easy prey tied to the tree and this new threat coming down the mountain. One of them made the mistake of charging. Ezra didn't have time to reload the Sharps. He dropped it, pulled his bowie knife from the sheath on his belt. The knife had an 11-inch blade, sharp enough to shave with, heavy enough to chop wood. The wolf came at him low and fast, going for his legs. Ezra sidestepped, brought the knife down hard across the animal's shoulder. Not a killing blow, but enough to send it yelping back into the brush. The last two decided they wanted no part of this fight. They melted into the darkening woods, and the hollow went quiet except for the sound of Ezra's breathing and the whisper of wind through pine needles. He picked up his rifle, checked the woman was still conscious, then moved toward the tree. Up close, he could see more. She was Apache, he thought, maybe late 20s. Her face was drawn tight with cold and exhaustion, but her eyes were clear and sharp. They tracked his every movement with an intelligence that told him she'd been measuring him since the moment he appeared. Her wrists were rubbed raw where the ropes bit into skin. Her hands had gone pale from lack of circulation, but when he pulled out his knife to cut her free, she didn't flinch. Most people would have, seeing a strange mountain man coming at them with a blade still wet with wolf blood, but she just watched him, waiting. The ropes fell away. Her arms dropped to her sides and she swayed, her knees starting to buckle. Ezra reached out to steady her, but she caught herself, locked her legs, and stayed upright through sheer force of will. She wasn't going to let herself fall. Not in front of him. Not in front of anyone. He gave her space, pulled his bearskin coat off his shoulders, and held it out to her. She looked at it for a long 5 seconds. He could see the war going on behind her eyes. Pride against cold, self-reliance against survival. Finally, survival won. She took the coat and wrapped it around herself. "Ma'am," Ezra said, his voice rough from disuse. He didn't talk much these days. "Name's Ezra Blackwood. Who did this to you?" Her voice, when it came, carried the distinctive rhythm of someone speaking English as a second language, but it was clear and steady. "My people. This is not your concern. Folks who leave a woman tied up for wolves don't get to decide what's my concern. Besides, if they left you here, they'll come back to check on their work. You can't stay." She studied him for another moment, and he could feel the weight of that gaze, measuring not just his words, but the man behind them. Whatever she saw must have been enough, because she nodded once, just once. "My camp is 2 miles east," Ezra said. "You able to walk that?" Another nod. No words wasted. He approved of that. They started walking. The trail was rough, rocky in places, slick with frost in others. Ezra led his horse, a Tennessee walker named Ash, and kept the pace slow. The woman, he noticed, refused to ride. She walked behind him, maintaining exactly 10 feet of distance like an invisible rope connected them. Every few minutes, Ezra would stop, pretend to check for tracks or listen for sounds, but really he was giving her a chance to rest without making it obvious. About a mile in, he picked up a sturdy walking stick from beside the trail and set it down where she'd see it. Didn't hand it to her, didn't say anything about it, just left it there. When he glanced back a minute later, she was using it. They didn't talk much on that walk. The cold was too bitter for casual conversation, and both of them were too wary for small talk. But about halfway there, she broke the silence. "My name is Naira." "Naira." He tested the weight of it. "That means something?" "Eternal bloom, flower that never dies." There was something bitter in her voice, though I think the name no longer fits. Ezra thought about that for a while before answering. Names are just sounds people make. It's what you do with them that matters. She didn't respond, but he heard her footsteps pause for just a heartbeat before continuing. The cabin came into view as full dark settled over the mountain. It was a simple structure, built from hand-hewn logs with the back wall set right up against a limestone cliff for extra insulation and protection. Smoke rose from the stone chimney, which meant the banked coals he'd left that morning were still alive. One window, currently shuttered, a small covered porch. Nothing fancy, but it was solid and tight against the weather. Ezra pushed the door open but didn't enter first. "You should go in ahead," he said. "Us mountain men learn manners before we learn to talk." For the first time something flickered across her face. Not quite a smile, but a crack in the armor. She looked at him with new eyes. "Apache people learn the same, but we learn it from wolves. Always observe before entering the den." Ezra felt something in his chest that he hadn't felt in 4 years. It took him a moment to recognize it as the beginning of a laugh. Not much of one, just a small chuckle, but it was there. The interior of the cabin was spare but clean. A bed of rough planks and corn husk mattress against the far wall. A table with 2 chairs that Ezra had carved himself. Shelves holding a few jars of beans, coffee, salt, some preserves. A pot hung over the small iron stove. The window had shutters that could be barred from inside. Everything a man needed to survive a mountain winter, and nothing more. Naira stood just inside the door, her eyes moving systematically over every corner, every shadow, every possible exit. Ezra recognized the behavior. She was mapping the space, looking for threats, planning escape routes. Smart. He pointed to the bed. "You can take that. I've been sleeping on the floor for 4 years now. Used to it." Her eyes went to the bed, then back to him. "Why?" The question was simple, but the answer wasn't. Ezra looked down at the worn floorboards, then back up at her. "My wife died in that bed. Died giving birth to our child. Lost them both. Haven't been able to lay on it since." The silence that followed felt heavy, but not uncomfortable. Naira nodded slowly, and he saw understanding pass across her features. She didn't offer sympathy, didn't say she was sorry. Apache people, he'd heard, respected grief by acknowledging it without dwelling on it. She understood that some wounds don't heal, they just become part of who you are. Ezra filled a tin cup with water from the bucket and handed it to her. She took it, but before drinking, she looked at him steadily, testing, watching to see if he'd be offended by her caution. "If I wanted to hurt you," he said evenly, "I'd have left you to the wolves." She nodded and drank. When she was done, he poured hot water from the kettle into another cup, added some wild ginger root he'd harvested, and a spoonful of honey. Handed it to her without comment. She cupped the warm tin in her hands, breathed in the steam, and for the first time since he'd found her, some of the tension seemed to ease from her shoulders. They sat in silence for a while, him on one of the chairs, her perched on the edge of the bed with his coat still wrapped around her shoulders. The fire crackled in the stove. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the eaves. Finally, Naira spoke. "You asked who did this. It was my cousin, Wolf Iron. He wanted something I would not give him, so he told lies to the tribal council. Said I had broken sacred law. They voted for the old punishment. Binding." "Binding?" "Tie the guilty one to a tree. Let the mountain decide if they live or die. If they survive 3 days, they are innocent. If they die, the judgment was correct." Her voice was flat, matter of fact. "No one survives 3 days." "What did he want?" "A rifle. My father was a gunsmith, a good one. He made weapons for Apache warriors, but he learned his craft from a Spaniard in Santa Fe. Before he died 3 years ago, he spent 2 years making one rifle, a Sharps 50 caliber. He carved eagle designs into the wood and metal, inlaid silver, made it a work of art. He told me it was mine, that I should never let anyone take it." Her hands tightened on the cup. "Wolf Iron says it belongs to the family, that I am only a woman and have no right to keep it." "Where's the rifle now?" "In my tent, 5 miles west, near Roaring Fork Stream. That's where I lived." She paused. "That's where I used to live." Ezra leaned back in his chair, thinking. "If they think you're dead, they'll take the rifle. Probably already have." "Not yet. Our custom says they must wait 3 days to respect the dead before touching their possessions. I was tied to that tree at dawn yesterday, so there is still time. But not much. No, not much." Ezra stood, moved to the window, lifted the shutter just enough to peer out into the darkness. Nothing moved in the trees. No sound, but wind. But something itched at the back of his mind, the same instinct that had kept him alive through years of tracking and trapping in these mountains. The feeling that eyes were watching, that something out there in the dark was paying very close attention to this little cabin and the two people inside it. He lowered the shutter, dropped the bar across it, went to the door and made sure that was barred too. Naira watched him work, her own instincts reading his tension. "You feel it too," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah, we had company on the walk here, I think. Or we've got company now. Wolf Iron's men. He would send them to make sure I died, to make sure no one interfered." She set down the cup, her hand moving unconsciously to her hip where a weapon would normally hang. But of course, she had nothing. They'd stripped her of everything before tying her to that tree. Ezra went to the gun rack, pulled down his Winchester 1866 carbine, and handed it to her. "You know how to use one of these? My father taught me the basics, but I am not practiced. We'll fix that tomorrow. For tonight you keep it close. Anyone comes through that door who isn't me, you don't wait for them to introduce themselves. Understood?" She took the rifle, checked it with hands that knew enough to verify it was loaded, and the action was smooth. "You do not have to fight for me. This is my trouble." "I pulled you off that tree. That makes it my trouble too." He met her eyes. "Besides, I'm too damn stubborn to let wolves finish what I interrupted." Something shifted in her expression then. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. The acknowledgement that he meant what he said, that he was the kind of man who, once committed, saw things through to the end. "Then we get the rifle back," she said. "But not tonight. They will be watching for me to do exactly that." Smart. He pulled a blanket from the shelf and spread it on the floor near the stove. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we figure out the next move." Naira lay back on the bed, still fully dressed, the Winchester across her chest like a soldier on watch. Ezra settled onto the floor, his back against the wall where he could see both the door and window. His own rifle rested against his thigh. Neither of them slept much that first night. Both were too wary, too aware of the danger that lurked somewhere out there in the frozen dark. But around midnight, Ezra heard Naira's breathing deepen and slow into true sleep. She trusted him enough for that at least. He stayed awake, listening to the wind and the small sounds of the cabin settling. And somewhere around 2 in the morning, he heard it. The soft crunch of footsteps in snow, just outside the cabin, circling, checking. 2 sets of footprints, he guessed, from the rhythm and pattern. They didn't try to break in. That wasn't the point. They just wanted him to know they were there, that they were watching, that this wasn't over. When dawn finally broke gray and cold through the cracks in the shutters, Ezra stood and stretched the stiffness from his muscles. Naira was already awake, sitting up, the rifle still in her hands. "There were 2 of them," she said quietly. "Last night. I heard them too." "Yeah. They wanted us to know." He moved to the door, listened for a long moment, then lifted the bar and stepped outside into the bitter morning air. The snow told the story clear as words on a page. 2 sets of tracks, one in moccasins with the distinctive beating pattern of Apache footwear, the other in military boots with iron heel plates. They'd circled the cabin 3 times, then headed back toward the west. Ezra, crouched by the clearest of the boot prints, studied it. Naira came to stand beside him. "You know someone who wears a blue army coat?" he asked. "Even in summer?" Her face went pale. "Hanaya Blue Coat, one of Wolf Iron's men. He took that coat from a dead soldier at Fort Loudon 10 years ago. Wears it like a trophy." She looked at the moccasin prints. "The other is probably Kai Running Deer. He has followed Wolf Iron since they were boys." "So now they know you're here. They know you didn't die." Ezra stood, brushed snow from his knees. "And they know you're not alone." "Yes, which means Wolf Iron knows. And if Wolf Iron knows, Then Silas Crow knows. Who's Crow? Naira's hands tightened on the rifle. The man Wolf Iron owes money to. $900. A gun dealer from Knoxville. The kind of man who smiles while he decides how to kill you. She turned to look at Ezra. The rifle is worth $600, but Crow could sell it to a collector for $1,200. That is why Wolf Iron is desperate. That is why he will not stop until he has it. Ezra absorbed this information, fitting the pieces together into a picture that grew darker with each edition. This wasn't just about a family dispute anymore. This was about money and dangerous men, and the kind of trouble that ended with people buried in shallow graves. He should have been scared, should have been thinking about how to get this woman off his mountain and back to her people so he could return to his quiet, solitary life. But instead, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. The weight of responsibility for something beyond his own survival. "Then we need to move fast," he said. "Get that rifle before they figure out what we're planning. You said your tent is 5 miles west?" "Yes, near Roaring Fork." "I know the place. There's an old trail through the high timber. Harder going, but less chance of running into anyone." He looked at the rising sun, calculating. "We prep today, move tonight." They spent the morning getting ready. Ezra showed Naira how to load and aim the Winchester, had her practice the motion until it became smooth and automatic. He didn't waste ammunition having her actually fire it. Powder and shot cost money, and every bullet had to count. But he made sure she understood the mechanics, the weight, the balance. She learned fast. Her father had taught her well, and what she lacked in practice she made up for in focus and determination. By midday, she could work the lever action without looking, could shoulder the weapon and sight down the barrel in one smooth motion. Around noon, they heard horses. 2 riders coming up the trail from the south. Ezra and Naira took positions on either side of the window, weapons ready. The riders stopped about 50 yards from the cabin. Didn't dismount, just sat there in their saddles, making sure they were seen. One of them, the one in the blue army coat, called out in a language Ezra didn't understand. Apache, he assumed. Naira's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. The man called out again, louder this time, insistent. When no answer came, he and his companion turned their horses and rode back the way they'd come. But the message had been delivered. "What did he say?" Ezra asked. "He said the tribal council commands me to return, today, or I will be declared a traitor to my people." Her voice was tight with controlled anger. "It is a lie. The council did not send them. Wolf Iron sent them, to see if I was here, to confirm I am still alive. And now they know. Yes, now they know." Ezra set his rifle against the wall and went to the stove, added wood to get the fire hot. "Then we eat. We rest a few hours, and we move at dusk." He looked at her. "This is going to get worse before it gets better. You understand that?" "I understand. But I will not let them take my father's rifle. It is all I have left of him, all I have left of my family." She met his eyes. "Would you let them take the last thing you had of your wife?" Ezra thought of Sarah's wedding ring, still in the small wooden box on the shelf above the bed. The only thing of hers he'd kept. He'd sold everything else to pay for the doctor and the burial and the debts that come with dying. But that ring he'd kept. "No," he said quietly. "I wouldn't. And I won't let them take your rifle either." Something passed between them in that moment. A recognition, an understanding. They were both people who'd lost everything that mattered. Both people trying to hold on to the last fragments of the lives they used to have. Both people stubborn enough to fight for those fragments, even when common sense said to let go. That night, as they prepared to leave, Naira reached into the small leather pouch at her belt, the only thing they hadn't taken from her. She pulled out a turquoise stone on a leather cord. It was old, worn smooth by years of handling. She held it out to Ezra. "This was my mother's. Apache people believe turquoise protects warriors in battle. You need it more than I do." Ezra looked at the stone, then at her. I can't take that. It's yours. Then you can hold it for me, until this is over. She pressed it into his hand. A trade. For the coat you gave me. For the roof over my head. For standing with me when you could have walked away. He closed his fingers around the stone, felt its warmth from being next to her skin, nodded once, then reached up and tied the cord around his neck, tucking the stone under his shirt where it rested against his heart. They stepped out into the gathering darkness. The temperature had dropped again, and fresh snow had started to fall. Light flakes that caught the last rays of twilight and turned the world into something almost beautiful. Ezra shouldered his pack, checked his weapons one more time. Naira stood beside him, the Winchester held ready, her eyes scanning the tree line. They started walking west toward Roaring Fork, toward the rifle that had become the focal point of all this trouble. The snow covered their tracks almost as fast as they made them, which was good, but it also covered the tracks of anyone else who might be moving through these mountains tonight. About a mile from the cabin, Ezra stopped, held up his hand. Naira froze beside him. There, in the shadows beneath a stand of pines, 3 pairs of eyes reflected the faint light of the rising moon. Not wolves this time. Something else. Someone else. Watching. Waiting. Ezra's hand went to his rifle. But before he could bring it up, the shapes melted back into the darkness and were gone. "They are ahead of us," Naira whispered. "They know where we are going." "Yeah." Ezra's voice was grim. This just became a whole lot more complicated. They had walked into a trap. The only question was whether they could get out of it alive. The Widow's Rifle. Part 2. The 3 shadows that had been watching them disappeared into the forest like smoke, but Ezra knew they hadn't gone far. Predators don't abandon prey once they've got the scent. They just circle wider, waiting for the right moment to strike. He turned to Naira, kept his voice low. "We keep moving. Stay close, stay quiet, and if I tell you to run, you run. Don't look back, don't wait for me. Just run." "I do not run," she said flatly. "Then you better learn fast, because what's out there isn't interested in a fair fight." They pushed deeper into the timber, following a game trail that wound through stands of hemlock and white pine. The snow was falling harder now, fat flakes that caught in their hair and beards that made the world silent and strange. Every 50 yards, Ezra stopped to listen, to watch, to make sure they weren't walking into something worse than what they'd left behind. Around midnight they reached a small clearing where an old lightning-struck oak stood like a skeleton against the sky. Ezra held up his hand and they stopped. He knelt down, studied the ground. Fresh tracks, boot prints, deep ones, made by a heavy man moving fast, and they were heading in the same direction Ezra and Naira were going, toward Roaring Fork. But there was something else, a second set of prints, lighter, older, made by someone wearing moccasins without the Apache beating pattern. These tracks came from the south, crossed the clearing, and disappeared into the trees on the north side. Someone else was out here. Someone neither of them had accounted for. Naira saw it too. She crouched beside him, touched the edge of the moccasin print with one finger. "This is not from my people. The pattern is wrong. Cherokee, maybe. Or someone trying to move quiet. Either way, we've got more than just Wolf Iron's men to worry about." Ezra stood, brushed snow from his knees. "We rest here. 5 minutes. Catch our breath." They settled with their backs against the fallen oak, weapons across their laps. The forest around them was alive with small sounds, the whisper of wind through branches, the creak of timber settling under snow weight, the distant call of an owl hunting in the darkness. Naira broke the silence first. "Tell me about your wife." The question caught him off guard. Most people, they dance around grief, treat it like a wound that can't be touched. But she asked direct, no apology in her voice. "Her name was Sarah," Ezra said after a moment. Met her in Gatlinburg. She was the preacher's daughter. Had this way of looking at you like she could see straight through to your bones, see all the things you tried to hide from yourself. He paused, the memories coming harder than he expected. We had 5 years. Good years. Then she got pregnant and everything went wrong. The baby came too early. Doctor said there was nothing he could do. Just had to wait and see how it played out. And it played out badly. Yeah. Lost them both in one night. Sarah first, then the baby an hour later. Boy. Never even got to hear him cry. His voice had gone rough, thick with old pain that never quite healed. Buried them together up on the ridge behind the cabin, under a dogwood tree. Sarah always loved dogwoods. Naira was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "My husband died 2 years ago, during the long march when the army forced us to move east. He got sick. Fever. They would not let us stop to care for him. Said we had to keep moving or be left behind. So we kept moving, and he kept getting worse, and one morning he just did not wake up." Her hands tightened on the rifle. "They made us leave his body by the side of the trail, like garbage, like he was nothing. I'm sorry. I am sorry about Sarah and your son, but I think maybe sorry is not enough for people like us. Sorry does not bring them back. It does not fill the empty places they left behind." "No," Ezra agreed. "It doesn't. But maybe we carry them with us. Keep going because they can't. Make sure their lives meant something even if they were too short." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw recognition in her eyes, the understanding that they were more alike than different. Two people carved hollow by loss, trying to figure out how to keep living when the reasons for living had been taken away. "You're Sarah," Naira said. "She would be proud of you, for helping me, for standing against men who deserve to be stood against." "I hope so, though sometimes I think she'd call me a damn fool for getting mixed up in something that's likely to get me killed." Then she was a wise woman. The corner of Naira's mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but close. "And you are a damn fool, but a good one." They sat there in the snow and the dark, and for just a moment the weight of what they were walking into seemed a little lighter, shared between two people instead of carried alone. Then Ezra heard it, the crack of a branch, not the natural break that comes from wind or snow. This was the sharp snap of wood under a boot, close, maybe 30 yards to the east. They were up and moving in an instant, no words needed. Ezra led them deeper into the timber, taking a route that kept them in cover, that used the natural folds of the land to hide their passage. Behind them he heard voices, men talking low but not bothering to whisper. They weren't trying to be quiet anymore. They knew where Ezra and Naira were headed, and they were moving to cut them off. The race was on. They pushed hard through terrain that fought them every step, fallen logs hidden under snow, ravines that appeared suddenly in the darkness, ice-slick rocks that could turn an ankle or worse. But Ezra knew these mountains, had spent 4 years learning every trail and game path, every ridge and hollow. He used that knowledge now, taking routes that would be harder to follow, that would buy them time. Behind them the voices grew more distant, but not distant enough. They reached Roaring Fork just before dawn. The stream was half frozen, ice forming along the edges while the center still ran free, making that distinctive roar that gave the place its name. On the far bank, tucked into a stand of aspens, Naira's tent stood exactly where she'd said it would be. But something was wrong. The tent flap was open, moving in the wind, and there were tracks everywhere, multiple sets, recent. "They have already been here," Naira whispered. Her voice carried a weight of dread. "Maybe. Or maybe they're here right now." Ezra scanned the tree line, looking for any sign of movement, any hint of an ambush. Nothing. The forest was still and quiet in that way it gets just before dawn. Too quiet. "I am going to check the tent," Naira said. "Not alone you're not." They crossed the stream, stepping carefully on rocks that weren't completely glazed with ice. The water was so cold it made Ezra's feet ache even through his boots. On the far bank, they approached the tent from an angle, using the aspens for cover. Ezra reached the tent first, pulled back the flap with the barrel of his rifle. Empty, but it had been searched, thoroughly. Blankets torn apart, food stores scattered, the few possessions Naira had owned thrown around like trash, and in the center of it all, driven through a piece of deerskin and into the frozen ground beneath, a knife, pinning a message. Naira pushed past him, knelt beside the knife. She pulled it free, read what was written on the deerskin. Her face went pale, then flushed with anger. "What does it say?" Ezra asked. "It says the rifle belongs to Wolf Iron by right of blood and custom. It says I am a thief and a liar. And it says any man who helps me will share my fate." She crumpled the deerskin in her fist. "It is signed by Wolf Iron, but the handwriting is not his. He cannot write English." "Then who wrote it?" Before she could answer, a voice came from the trees behind them, a voice that carried authority and confidence and the particular accent of someone who'd been educated back east. "I wrote it. Deputy Frank Mosley, Sevier County Sheriff's Office. You two want to come out where I can see you proper? Hands where I can see them, weapons on the ground." Ezra turned slowly. The man who stepped out of the aspens wore a long black leather coat over a deputy's badge. He was maybe 35, clean-shaven, with the kind of face that could smile while planning how to hurt you. His pistol was drawn but not pointed directly at them yet. Professional courtesy, or at least the appearance of it. Beside him stood two others. One was Apache, young and hard-eyed, with intricate beading on his moccasins. The other wore that blue army coat, buttons long since replaced with bone toggles, the fabric stained and worn but still recognizably military. Kai Running Deer and Hanaya Bluecoat. The names Naira had spoken. "Deputy Mosley," Ezra said carefully, not moving, not setting down his rifle yet. "That's a long way from Gatlinburg this time of morning. Job takes me where it takes me. Right now it takes me here, looking for a woman wanted by her own people for theft and dishonoring her family. Apache Council wants her back to face judgment." He nodded toward Naira. "That woman." "The Apache Council wants no such thing," Naira said, her voice hard as stone. "Wolf Iron wants me dead before anyone learns the truth, that he gambled away money he did not have, that he owes $900 to Silas Crow, that he tried to steal my father's rifle to pay his debts." Mosley's smile didn't waver. "That's a serious accusation to make without proof. All I know is what I've been told, that you took a rifle worth $600 that rightfully belongs to your cousin. That's theft, ma'am, and theft is a crime I'm sworn to address." "You're sworn to justice," Ezra said, "not to helping criminals steal from innocent people." Big words from a mountain man with no badge and no authority. Mosley's hand shifted on his pistol, still not aiming it, but the threat was clear. "Way I see it, you got two choices. Hand over the woman and the rifle, ride away from this still breathing, or we do this the hard way." "There's always a third choice," Ezra said quietly. "And what's that?" "You tell me who's paying you, because Silas Crow doesn't have $900 to lend to Apache gamblers unless he's got income from somewhere, and deputies in Sevier County make maybe $40 a month, not enough to be riding out here in the snow at dawn unless someone's paying you extra." For just a second, something flickered across Mosley's face. Surprise, maybe, or respect for having been figured out. Then the professional mask was back. "You're smarter than you look, Blackwood. I heard about you. The hermit on Klingman's Dome. The man who buried his wife and quit living. But here you are, getting involved in something that's way over your head." He glanced at the two men flanking him. "Crow pays me $200 a month to look the other way, to make sure his business interests don't get interrupted by inconvenient laws. And right now, his business interest is that rifle. So I'm going to ask you one more time, nice and polite. Where is it?" Naira's hand had moved, slowly, carefully, until it rested on the revolver Ezra had given her. The Colt Dragoon, tucked into her belt. Mosley saw the movement, and his own pistol came up. "Don't," he said. I will shoot you, ma'am. Won't enjoy it, but I'll do it." That's when the old man stepped out of the forest. He appeared so suddenly, so silently, that for a moment everyone just stared. He was ancient, 70 years if he was a day, his face carved deep with wrinkles, his hair white as the snow falling around them. He wore traditional Apache clothing, deerskin decorated with symbols that marked him as someone of importance, and he carried no weapons at all. "Red Cloud Walker," Naira breathed. The old man looked at her, and his eyes were kind. "Naira Swiftwater, daughter of Laughing Bear. The council did not send these men. I did not send these men. This is Wolf Iron's lie, grown like poison in our community." He turned to face Mosley. "And you, deputy, you shame your badge, you shame your people. You work for a man who profits from pain." "Old-timer, you need to step back before you get hurt," Mosley said. "I am 71 years old. I have seen more death than you can imagine. I do not fear you." Red Cloud Walker moved closer to Naira. "I followed Wolf Iron and Crow 4 days ago. I heard them speak. I heard Crow say, 'Kill the girl if you must, just bring me the rifle.' I heard Wolf Iron agree, though his voice shook when he said it. I know the truth, and I will speak it before the council." "That's a real nice story," Mosley said, "but words don't mean much without proof." "Then perhaps this will mean something." Red Cloud reached into his shirt and pulled out a leather pouch. He opened it, dumped the contents onto the snow at Mosley's feet. Gold coins. 20 of them, maybe more. Each one stamped with the seal of the Confederacy. Coins that had been out of circulation for nearly a decade. Coins that were rare enough to be worth far more than their face value. "I took these from Wolf Iron's tent," Red Cloud said calmly. "He did not earn them honestly. He did not win them gambling. They were payment, from Crow, for services rendered, for bringing him Apache rifles to sell. This has been happening for months. Wolf Iron has been stealing weapons from our people, selling them to Crow, losing the money at cards. And now he is desperate. Desperate enough to kill his own blood." Mosley's face had gone hard. "You're making accusations you can't prove." "I can prove them, because I am not alone." Red Cloud raised his voice slightly. "You can come out now." From the trees emerged 5 more Apache men, all elders, all carrying themselves with the dignity and authority of tribal council members. They formed a half circle around Mosley and his men, and suddenly the balance of power had shifted. "The council knows," Red Cloud said. "We know about Wolf Iron. We know about you, Deputy Mosley. We know about Crow. And we are done allowing our people to be used and stolen from." He turned to Naira. "The rifle is yours. Your father made it for you. Wolf Iron has no claim, and when we return to camp, he will answer for his crimes." Kai Running Deer looked at the elders, at Red Cloud, then at Mosley, then at... Something in his face crumbled, the hard certainty, the absolute loyalty. It broke apart like ice under spring sun. "I did not know," he said, his voice cracking. "Wolf Iron told me she was a thief, that she had shamed us. I did not know he was the one stealing." "Then you were a fool," Red Cloud said, not unkindly. "But you can stop being one now." Kai looked at Naira. "I am sorry. I believed him. I should not have." Hanaya Bluecoat said nothing, just slowly raised his hands, showing he wasn't going to reach for a weapon. The fight had gone out of him. That left only Mosley. And Mosley was a man trapped, cornered, with nowhere to run and too much pride to surrender. "This doesn't change anything," he said. "I've got a legal warrant for that woman's arrest. Apache Council business is Apache business. Mine is the law." "Then enforce it," Ezra said quietly. "Arrest Silas Crow. Arrest Wolf Iron. Arrest everyone who's been stealing and lying and hurting innocent people. Do your actual job." Mosley's finger tightened on the trigger. For a long, terrible second, Ezra thought he was going to shoot, that this whole thing was going to end in blood and snow and bodies that would have to be buried before the ground froze too hard. Then Mosley lowered his pistol, not holstering it, but lowering it. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Crow won't forget this. He'll come after you. All of you." "Then let him come," Red Cloud Walker said. "We will be ready." Mosley looked at each of them in turn. Then he backed away, step by step, until he reached his horse. He mounted up, turned the animal, and rode away without another word. Not fast, not running, just leaving. But the message was clear. This wasn't over. When the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely, Naira turned to Red Cloud Walker. "Thank you does not seem like enough." "It is enough," the old man said. "Your father saved my life when we were young. I owed him a debt. Now it is paid." He gestured to the tent. "The rifle is not here. Wolf Iron moved it yesterday, hid it somewhere he thought safe." "Where?" "Blue Hollow Falls, the cave behind the waterfall. That is where your father taught him to shoot when he was a boy. Wolf Iron thinks he is being clever, honoring his teacher while stealing from his daughter." Red Cloud shook his head. "He is a fool, but he is still dangerous. You must go there, take the rifle, then come to the council, and we will settle this properly." Ezra looked at the sky. Dawn was breaking, pale and cold. "Blue Hollow is 6 miles from here. Good trail most of the way, but the last mile is rough." "We can make it by noon," Naira said. "We can, but so can Mosley once he tells Crow what happened. And Crow will come with more men than just a corrupt deputy and 2 Apache who've lost their nerve. Then we move fast, and we move now." Naira checked her weapons, adjusted the coat around her shoulders. She looked at Red Cloud. "I will make my father proud. I will not let his work be stolen by those who do not deserve it." "You already make him proud, child. Every day you stand when others would fall. Every day you fight when others would surrender." The old man touched her shoulder briefly, a blessing. Then he and the other elders melted back into the forest, heading toward their camp. Ezra and Naira were alone again, just the 2 of them and the trail ahead, and the knowledge that somewhere out there, dangerous men were moving to stop them. "You ready for this?" Ezra asked. Naira smiled then, a real smile, fierce and bright. "I was ready the moment you cut me free. Everything since then has just been me remembering how." They started walking toward Blue Hollow Falls, toward the rifle that had become more than just metal and wood. It had become the symbol of everything they'd lost and everything they were fighting to keep. The snow fell harder. The wind picked up. And behind them, miles away but getting closer, Silas Crow was gathering his men and planning his revenge. The Widow's Rifle, Part 3. They didn't sleep that night, couldn't risk it with 3 watchers in the darkness. Instead, Ezra led Naira on a wide circle through the timber, doubling back twice, using every tracker's trick he knew to shake whoever was following. By the time dawn broke gray and cold, they'd climbed higher, coming at the trail to Blue Hollow Falls from a direction nobody would expect. The trail cut through some of the roughest country in the Smokies. 6 miles as the crow flies, but more like 8 when you factored in the switchbacks and detours needed to avoid terrain that would break an ankle, or worse. Ezra set a hard pace, pushing them both because he knew time was bleeding away with every minute they spent on this mountain. The forest grew thicker as they climbed. Old-growth hemlock and poplar, trees so massive 3 men couldn't link hands around their trunks. The canopy overhead blocked most of the falling snow, but it also blocked the light, turning mid-morning into permanent twilight. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every sound could be the warning that came too late. They'd been walking for 2 hours when Naira suddenly stopped. Her hand shot out, grabbed Ezra's sleeve. He froze, following her gaze to a spot 50 yards ahead where the trail narrowed between 2 limestone bluffs. There, stretched across the path at knee height, was a tripwire. Crude but effective. Hard to see unless you knew exactly what to look for. And beyond it, partially hidden in the brush, the dark shape of a bear trap, the kind with iron jaws that could take a man's leg off. "Wolf Iron," Naira said quietly. "He knows this trail, knows we would come this way." Ezra knelt, examined the wire without touching it. Professional work. Someone had taken time to set this right, to make it nearly invisible. "He's more desperate than I thought. This isn't about the rifle anymore. This is about making sure nobody walks out of here to tell the truth." They carefully stepped over the wire, gave the bear trap a wide berth, and kept moving. But now they moved differently, slower, watching not just the trail ahead, but the trail itself, looking for signs of other traps, other dangers. A mile further on, they found evidence that someone else had come this way recently. Boot prints in the mud where snow hadn't reached, fresh broken branches, and most telling, the still warm ashes of a small fire hastily kicked apart. "Multiple people," Ezra said, reading the signs. "At least 3, maybe 4, moving fast but not trying too hard to hide their tracks." "Because they want us to find them," Naira said. "Want us to know they are ahead of us, to make us afraid." "And are you? Afraid?" She thought about that for a moment before answering. "Yes. But I learned something 2 days ago when I was tied to that tree. Fear is just your body telling you that you are alive, that you still have something worth fighting for. I would rather be afraid and fighting than safe and dead inside." Ezra looked at this woman who'd been left to die and had somehow found the strength not just to survive, but to keep pushing forward, to keep demanding justice in a world that had given her every reason to give up. He thought about Sarah and how she'd faced death with that same quiet courage, how she'd held his hand and told him it was okay to keep living even after she was gone. "Your father raised you right," he said. "Yes, he did." She touched the Winchester slung across her back. "And now I am going to show Wolf Iron what that means." The sound of the falls reached them before they saw it. Blue Hollow got its name from the way the mist caught the light and turned the whole gorge into something blue and otherworldly. The water dropped 60 feet from a limestone shelf into a pool that never quite froze even in the deepest winter. Behind the falls, hidden by tons of cascading water, was the cave, big enough for a dozen men to shelter in, deep enough to hide things you didn't want found. They approached from above, using the high ground to scout the area before committing. And that's when they saw them. Wolf Iron stood near the base of the falls. He was tall for an Apache, broad-shouldered, and even from a distance Ezra could see the scar that ran from his cheek to his jaw like a hook, a wound from some old battle that had healed but never faded. Behind him stood 3 men. Hania Bluecoat, looking uncertain and miserable, a white man Ezra didn't recognize, lean and dangerous with the look of a professional gunfighter, and bringing up the rear, pacing like a caged animal, Deputy Mosley. But there was someone else, a 5th man who stood apart from the others, watching them with the casual authority of someone used to giving orders and having them obeyed. He wore an expensive wool coat, city clothes out of place in this wilderness. His face was hard and calculating. Silas Crow. Had to be. "That is all of them," Naira whispered. Wolf Iron's desperation made flesh. They watched as Wolf Iron ducked behind the waterfall into the cave, emerged a minute later carrying something wrapped in oiled leather. Even from this distance, even wrapped up, Ezra could tell what it was by the shape. The rifle, the Sharps 50 caliber that had caused all this trouble. Crow stepped forward, held out his hands. Wolf Iron hesitated, just for a second, but it was there. The moment when he realized what he was doing, selling his own blood's inheritance to a white man who dealt in weapons and death, betraying everything his Uncle Laughing Bear had stood for. Then the moment passed. Wolf Iron handed over the rifle. Crow unwrapped it, held it up to catch the light. Even through the mist and distance, the gun was beautiful. The carved eagles, the silver inlay, the craftsmanship that spoke of hundreds of hours of patient work. "That is not his to sell," Naira said. Her voice was tight, controlled, but underneath Ezra heard the rage, the grief, the absolute determination to set this right. Then let's go take it back. They made their way down, using the terrain for cover, getting as close as they could before they'd have to break into the open. Ezra's plan was simple, because complicated plans fall apart the moment the shooting starts. Get close, make their presence known, force a confrontation where numbers didn't matter as much as who was right and who was willing to die for it. They were 30 yards out when Mosley spotted them. His hand went to his pistol, but Ezra already had the sharps to his shoulder, aimed at the deputy's center mass. "Don't!" Ezra called out. "I'm a fair shot. At this range, I don't miss." Everyone froze. 5 men by the waterfall, 2 coming down the slope. The air suddenly electric with tension and the knowledge that someone was probably about to die. Crow was the first to speak. His voice carried that same educated accent Mosley had, but there was something colder underneath it. Something that suggested violence was just another business transaction. "Ezra Blackwood, I've heard about you. The hermit who can't let go of his dead wife. And here you are playing hero for an Apache woman who stole from her own family. That's touching, really, but also incredibly stupid." "That rifle belongs to her," Ezra said. "Her father made it for her. Wolf Iron has no claim, and you know it. Ownership is a matter of perspective. I paid good money for this rifle, $900 worth of debt forgiveness to be precise. That makes it mine, legally purchased. Anyone says different is calling me a thief, and I take exception to that." Naira stepped forward, the Winchester in her hands. "You are a thief. Worse, you are a thief who hides behind false law and corrupted men. My father spent 2 years making that rifle. It was his masterwork, his gift to me, and you will not have it." Wolf Iron, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. His voice carried shame and anger in equal measure. "Naira, cousin, I am sorry, but I had no choice. Crow would have killed me, would have killed my family. I did what I had to do." "You had a choice," Naira shot back. "You could have come to me, could have asked for help, could have done anything except lie and betray and try to have me killed. You chose money over honor, chose yourself over family. That is not having no choice. That is being a coward." The word hung in the air like a gunshot. In Apache culture, few insults cut deeper than coward. Wolf Iron's face twisted with rage and shame, and his hand moved toward the pistol at his belt. "Don't," Crow said sharply. "Not yet. Let's see if we can settle this like civilized people." He looked at Ezra. "Here's my offer. You walk away, both of you. I keep the rifle. Wolf Iron's debt is cleared. Everyone lives. Everyone goes home. Simple." "And if we say no?" Ezra asked. Crow's smile was cold as the waterfall. "Then we stop being civilized. And trust me, Blackwood, you don't want that. I've got 4 men here. You've got yourself and a woman who probably can't even shoot that Winchester she's holding. The math isn't complicated." "Actually," came a new voice from behind Crow's group, "the math just changed." Everyone spun around. Standing at the edge of the clearing, having approached silently while everyone was focused on the confrontation, was Red Cloud Walker. And he wasn't alone. Behind him stood 10 Apache warriors, all armed, all ready. And beside Red Cloud, looking grim and official, was a face Ezra recognized from trips into Gatlinburg. Marshal Jacob Hayes, the county marshal. The law that stood above corrupt deputies and bought justice. "Deputy Mosley," Hayes said, his voice carrying the weight of authority and deep disappointment. "I got an interesting telegram yesterday. Said you might be out here working for the wrong side. Didn't want to believe it, but here you are." Mosley's face went pale. "Marshal, this isn't what it looks like. It looks like you're helping a known criminal steal from an innocent woman. It looks like you've been on Crow's payroll. It looks like you've shamed your badge and betrayed your oath." Hayes drew his own pistol. "Drop your weapon. You're under arrest." The clearing erupted into chaos. Mosley went for his gun. The professional gunfighter Crow had brought reached for his. Wolf Iron grabbed for the rifle Crow was holding, trying to take it back, maybe trying to undo what couldn't be undone. Ezra shot first. Not to kill, but to disarm. His bullet took Mosley in the shoulder, spun him around, sent his pistol flying into the snow. The gunfighter got his weapon clear, fired once, twice. One bullet whined past Ezra's ear. The other took bark off the tree beside him. Then Naira fired. The Winchester bucked against her shoulder. Her shot caught the gunfighter in the leg, dropped him screaming. Not a kill shot, but enough to take him out of the fight. The Apache warriors moved in, surrounding Crow and his men. It was over in seconds. But it wasn't over. Wolf Iron lunged for the Sharp's rifle still clutched in Crow's hands. Naira saw him move. She dropped the Winchester and ran, closing the distance in seconds. They reached the rifle at the same moment, both grabbing for the carved wooden stock. For 3 heartbeats, cousin and cousin stood face to face, hands on the same weapon their uncle had spent 2 years creating. Close enough that Naira could see tears streaming down Wolf Iron's scarred face. "Let go," Naira said, her voice like stone. "I had no choice," Wolf Iron whispered. "You have to understand. He would have killed my children." "You had every choice. You chose this." She wrenched the rifle from his grip with strength born of fury, stepped back, leveled it at his chest. The clearing went silent. Everyone watching, waiting. Wolf Iron closed his eyes. "Then do it. I deserve it." For a long moment, Naira's finger rested on the trigger. Then she lowered the barrel. "No. You are already dead to me, cousin. I do not need to kill you twice." The Apache warriors moved in then, surrounding Crow and his men. Over before it really began. Crow stood there, still holding the rifle, realizing that he'd lost. That for once in his life money and intimidation and hired guns weren't enough. Marshal Hayes walked over, took the rifle from Crow's hands, looked it over with the appreciation of someone who knew fine craftsmanship when he saw it. Then he walked to Naira and held it out to her. "Miss Swiftwater, I believe this belongs to you. On behalf of Sevier County, I apologize for what you've endured. This rifle is your legal property. Anyone says different, they answer to me." Naira took the rifle. Her hands trembled as she held it, as she ran her fingers over the carved eagles her father had spent so many hours creating. Tears ran down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. Just held the rifle close and let herself feel everything she'd been holding back. Ezra watched her, and something in his chest that had been frozen solid for 4 years began, finally, to thaw. The Widow's Rifle, Part 4. The walk back to Gatlinburg took most of the day. Marshal Hayes had Wolf Iron, Mosley, and Crow in irons, hands bound, connected by a length of chain, like cattle being led to market. The professional gunfighter, his leg wrapped tight to stop the bleeding, rode double with one of the Apache warriors. None of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. Naira walked beside Ezra, the Sharp's rifle cradled in her arms like a sleeping child. She hadn't let go of it since the marshal handed it over. Every few minutes, Ezra would glance at her and see her running her fingers over the carved eagles, tracing the patterns her father had spent 2 years perfecting. The rifle was more than metal and wood now. It was proof that sometimes the world could be made right, that sometimes justice wasn't just a word people used to make themselves feel better about the way things were. They reached Gatlinburg as the sun was setting, painting the little mountain town in shades of orange and gold. Word had spread fast the way it does in small places. By the time they walked down Main Street toward the marshal's office, people were coming out of shops and homes to watch, to see the woman everyone had heard about, the Apache widow who'd been left to die and had somehow survived, who'd stood up to corrupt lawmen and dangerous criminals and won. Sam Porter was among them. The old shopkeeper who'd been Ezra's father's friend stood on his porch, arms crossed, a smile creasing his weathered face. When Ezra passed, Sam nodded once. A gesture of respect between men who understood that sometimes you had to stand for something even when standing meant risking everything. The marshal's office was a solid stone building that doubled as the county jail. Hayes led his prisoners inside while Red Cloud Walker and his warriors remained outside, a silent honor guard that sent a clear message to anyone watching The Apache people were done being pushed around, done being stolen from, done being treated like they didn't matter. Inside, Hayes began the process of booking his prisoners. Crow maintained his cold silence, but his eyes promised revenge. Mosley kept trying to explain, to justify, to make excuses. The marshal ignored him. Some betrayals were too deep for words to bridge. Wolf Iron just stood there, staring at nothing, a man who'd gambled away more than money. He'd lost his honor, his family, his place in the community. Those were things no amount of talking could win back. Reverend Thomas Whitmore arrived while Hayes was filling out paperwork. The minister was a solid man in his late 40s with kind eyes and the weathered hands of someone who'd done hard work before finding his calling. He'd heard what happened, rode into town as fast as his old mare could manage. "Miss Swiftwater," he said, approaching Naira with the careful respect of someone who understood boundaries and trauma. "I knew your father. Laughing Bear brought his rifles to me once, asked me to bless them, said he wanted to make sure they only brought justice, never murder. He was a good man. And that rifle he made for you, he showed it to me a month before he died, told me it was for his daughter, that no one else had the right to it." Naira looked at the minister, this white man speaking truth when other white men had tried to steal and kill. "You would testify to this? Before a court?" "I would, and I will. As God is my witness, that rifle is yours." More people began arriving. Mrs. Clara Jennings from the bakery, bringing bread still warm from the oven. Henry Dodd, the blacksmith, his leather apron still on from work. Miss Abigail Reed, the schoolteacher, her hair pulled back severe but her eyes warm. Old Jake McCoy, who fixed wagons and told stories about the war. One by one they came, not just to see, but to stand witness, to make it clear that they were on the side of right. "We heard what Deputy Mosley did," Mrs. Jennings said, her voice carrying that particular anger righteous people get when they see evil done in the name of law. "Heard he was taking money from Crow. Been wondering for months how that man afforded a new horse and fancy boots on a deputy's pay. Should have spoken up sooner, should have trusted our eyes instead of our fears." "You're speaking up now," Marshal Hayes said from behind his desk. "That's what matters, and I'll need statements, from all of you, everything you've seen, everything you know, because Silas Crow has lawyers and money, and I want to make damn sure he doesn't buy his way out of this." They spent the next 2 hours in that office. People coming and going, telling what they'd witnessed, signing statements that would be used in court, building a case that was more than just one woman's word against powerful men. It was a community saying enough, saying we see you, saying we won't be part of your corruption anymore. When the last statement had been signed and witnessed, Reverend Whitmore made a suggestion. We should gather at the church, all of us, to mark this moment, to show that justice was done in the light, not hidden in shadows. They walked through the darkening streets, a strange procession of mountain folk and Apache warriors, of merchants and farmers and people who'd never had much but who understood that some things mattered more than comfort or safety. The little Baptist church stood white and proud on the edge of town, its bell tower reaching toward stars just beginning to appear. Inside, oil lamps cast warm light across simple wooden pews and a plain altar. No fancy decorations, no stained glass or carved figures, just honest wood and honest faith. The people filed in, filling the small space until they stood shoulder to shoulder, and the warmth of their bodies pushed back the winter cold seeping through the walls. Reverend Whitmore stood before them, but he didn't launch into a sermon. Instead, he looked at Naira. "Would you tell us? Tell us about your father, about the rifle. Help us understand why this matters." Naira stood, walked to the front of the church. She held the Sharp's rifle, and in the lamplight, the silver inlay caught and reflected, making the carved eagles seem almost alive. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady, strong, the voice of someone who'd walked through fire and come out tempered like steel. "My father was Laughing Bear. He learned his craft from a Spanish gunsmith in Santa Fe. Learned that a rifle is not just a tool for killing, it is art. It is the soul of the maker poured into metal and wood. He spent 2 years on this rifle. 2 years of careful work, of getting each detail perfect. He told me, "This is for you, daughter, for when I am gone. So you remember that beauty can exist even in things made for war. So you remember that honor matters more than survival." She paused, and her next words came harder. When Wolf Iron tried to take this rifle, he was not just stealing property. He was stealing my father's voice, his legacy, his final gift to the daughter he loved. And when this community stood up, when you all said no, when you chose right over easy, you gave that voice back. You let my father speak one more time. And for that, I am grateful beyond words. The silence that followed was the kind that feels sacred, the kind that happens when people witness something true and profound. Then Red Cloud Walker stood, his old bones creaking, and addressed the crowd. "I am Red Cloud Walker. I have lived 71 winters. I have seen much sorrow and much joy. Today I saw something I did not think possible in these times. I saw people of different nations, different colors, different beliefs, come together to stand for one woman's right to keep what was hers. This gives me hope. Hope that maybe the world is not as broken as it sometimes seems." One by one, others stood to speak. Sam Porter talked about integrity, Mrs. Jennings about courage, Marshall Hayes about the difference between law and justice, and how sometimes you needed both to make things right. Each voice adding to a chorus that said something important had happened here, something worth remembering. When the gathering finally ended, people filed out into the cold night, but they moved different than when they'd entered, stood a little straighter, met each other's eyes with something that looked like pride. They'd been tested, and they'd passed. That meant something. Ezra and Naira were the last to leave. They stood in the doorway, looking out at the town quiet under starlight. "What will you do now?" Ezra asked. "Go back to your people?" Naira was quiet for a long moment. "The council said I am welcome to return. Red Cloud Walker said they will formally clear my name, declare Wolf Iron cast out for his crimes, but I do not know if I can go back. Too much has changed. I have changed." "Then what?" She turned to look at him, and in her eyes was something he hadn't seen before. Not just gratitude or respect, but possibility. The kind that comes when you've walked through darkness with someone and come out the other side still standing. "Your cabin. You said it was lonely. That for 4 years it was just walls and a roof, not a home." She adjusted the rifle in her arms. "Maybe it does not have to be lonely anymore. Maybe two people who have lost everything can build something new. Not to replace what was lost, but to honor it. To show that life continues even after grief tries to end it." Ezra felt something in his chest, that frozen place where his heart used to be, crack open just a little wider. Not healed, maybe never fully healed, but healing, making room for something new without forgetting what came before. "I'd like that," he said simply. "I'd like that a lot." They walked back through Gatlinburg together, past the shops closing for the night, past the marshal's office where Crow and Mosley and Wolf Iron sat in cells contemplating the cost of their choices. They walked until the town fell behind them, and there was only the trail leading up into the mountains. Leading home. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, the same stars that had watched over Sarah and Laughing Bear, the same stars that would watch over Ezra and Naira as they built something new from the broken pieces of their old lives. The rifle hung across Naira's back now, no longer cradled, but carried, ready if needed, but no longer the center of everything. It had become what Laughing Bear intended, a reminder that honor matters, that some things are worth fighting for, that beauty can exist even in a world that tries so hard to destroy it. And as they climbed higher into the darkness, toward a cabin that would soon be a home, both of them felt something they hadn't felt in years. Hope. The Widow's Rifle. Part 5. 3 months passed, but not peacefully. Twice in those first weeks, Strangers rode up the mountain trail asking about Silas Crow and what had happened at Blue Hollow Falls. Once, Ezra found a dead crow nailed to a tree near the cabin with a note tucked under its wing. The crows have long memories. Each time, he and Naira stood ready, rifles loaded, watching the tree line. Each time, nothing came of it. Slowly, like water wearing down stone, they learned to breathe again. Winter gave way to early spring in the Smokies, and the mountain transformed. Ice melted into rushing streams. Snow retreated to the highest peaks. The first green shoots pushed through dead leaves, brave and determined, reclaiming ground that winter had tried to hold forever. The cabin changed too. Ezra spent weeks expanding it, adding a second room with Naira working beside him. She learned to notch logs and pack chinking, her hands growing calloused alongside his. They worked in the kind of comfortable silence that comes when two people understand each other beyond words. When conversation isn't needed because simply being together says everything that matters. The Sharp's rifle hung above the fireplace now, mounted on wooden pegs Ezra had carved special for it. Next to it hung his own Winchester. 2 rifles. 2 stories. 2 people who'd found each other in the darkest of circumstances and chosen to build something light. On a warm April morning, Naira was outside the cabin grinding herbs she'd gathered the day before. Ezra was splitting firewood, his axe rising and falling in a steady rhythm that spoke of years doing exactly this work. The sound echoed off the limestone cliff behind the cabin, a percussion that felt like home. That's when they heard the horse. Both of them stopped what they were doing, hands moving automatically to weapons that were never far away. Trust was earned slow in these mountains, and recent events had taught them that danger could wear friendly faces. But the rider who emerged from the tree line wasn't a threat. It was Sam Porter, sitting easy on his old mare, a saddlebag bulging with something that looked like mail. "Sam," Ezra called out, lowering the axe. "You rode all the way up here?" "Got something I figured you'd want to see right away," Sam said, dismounting with the careful movements of a man whose joints complained more with each passing year. He reached into the saddlebag and pulled out a newspaper. The Knoxville Gazette, dated 3 days prior. Ezra took the paper, and Naira moved close to read over his shoulder. The headline made them both stop breathing for a moment. Silas Crow sentenced to 15 years hard labor. Deputy Frank Mosley stripped of badge, 5 years federal prison. Apache man Wolf Iron exiled, banned from all tribal lands. The article detailed the trial, how 30 witnesses had testified, how evidence had been presented that showed a pattern of theft and corruption stretching back 2 years. How the jury, made up of local men who understood the difference between letter of law and spirit of justice, had deliberated less than an hour before finding all 3 men guilty. "Judge threw the book at them," Sam said, his voice carrying satisfaction. "Said he was making an example, that this county wouldn't tolerate lawmen who sold their oaths or businessmen who thought money made them above justice." He pointed to another paragraph. "And there's more. Federal marshal is investigating Crow's business dealings across 3 states. Turns out he was running guns to both sides during some of the Indian conflicts out west, profiting off people killing each other." Naira read the article twice, her fingers tracing the words like she needed the physical touch to believe they were real. "It is over then. Truly over." "Looks that way," Sam agreed. He glanced at the expanded cabin, at the garden plot Naira had started, at the general air of a place being lived in rather than just occupied. "You 2 settling in good up here?" "Better than good," Ezra said. He looked at Naira, and something passed between them. An understanding, a decision made without needing discussion. "Sam, you think Reverend Whitmore would be willing to make another trip up this mountain?" Sam's eyes crinkled with understanding. "I think he'd consider it an honor. Though I got to ask, you planning what I think you're planning?" Naira smiled, and it was like watching the sun break through clouds. "We are planning to stop being 2 people living in the same place and start being a family, if the Reverend will speak the words, if the law will recognize it." Law will recognize whatever the Reverend says, and I suspect there's a whole town down there that would like to witness it." Sam pulled himself back into the saddle, wincing slightly. "I'll spread the word. Give you a week to prepare?" "A week," Ezra agreed. They watched Sam ride back down the mountain, then stood there in the quiet that followed. A week wasn't much time, but neither of them needed elaborate preparations. What they needed was simple: each other, witnesses, and words spoken that would make official what their hearts had already decided. The week passed in a blur of activity. Naira made a dress from doeskin, decorating it with beadwork in traditional Apache patterns. Red Cloud Walker came up the mountain with 3 other elders, bringing gifts and blessing. They performed a cleansing ceremony that honored both Naira's heritage and her new beginning. Ezra rode into Gatlinburg to speak with the Reverend to make the necessary arrangements. While there, he stopped at the small general store and did something he hadn't done in years. He bought himself new clothes, a proper shirt, trousers that didn't have patches on the patches. He even let the barber trim his beard and hair, though he drew the line at shaving completely. A mountain man could only change so much. The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and warm. Perfect spring weather, the kind that makes you believe in fresh starts and second chances. People began arriving at the cabin around noon, not just from Gatlinburg, but from homesteads scattered across 3 counties. News had traveled. This wedding was about more than 2 people joining lives. It was a symbol of something larger, of communities coming together, of old wounds starting to heal. They set up in the clearing in front of the cabin where wildflowers had begun to bloom in riotous color. Someone brought benches, someone else brought food. Mrs. Jennings arrived with pies and bread. Henry Dodd brought a hand-forged iron hook, saying every proper home needed a place to hang pots. Miss Abigail Reed brought books, insisting that even on a mountaintop, people needed stories. Marshall Hayes came in his official capacity, ready to file the marriage certificate. He'd brought his wife, a quiet woman who pressed Naira's hand and said welcome to Tennessee, like Naira was finally, officially, allowed to belong. Red Cloud Walker stood beside Ezra, having agreed to serve as witness and elder. The old man wore his finest ceremonial dress, and the eagle feather in his hair caught the sunlight as he moved. When Naira emerged from the cabin wearing the doeskin dress she'd made, its beadwork telling her story in Apache symbols, conversation stopped. She carried her father's eagle feather, and Ezra saw in her eyes everything he needed to know. Reverend Whitmore stood between them, his words simple and true. We witnessed 2 lives joined, 2 people who walked through fire and chose each other. "Ezra, do you take this woman as your wife to stand beside her in all that comes?" "I do, every day for the rest of my life." "Naira, do you take this man as your husband, to build with him what neither could build alone?" "I do," she said, then added in Apache words Red Cloud later translated, "I choose this man, I choose this life." Red Cloud bound their eagle feathers with sinew. 2 lives, strong together, but each still free to fly. Red Cloud Walker stepped forward then, and spoke in both Apache and English, his voice carrying the weight of 71 years and wisdom earned hard. In the old ways, a marriage was not just between 2 people, but between families, between communities. Today we see this truth made real. The people of these mountains and the Apache people stand together to bless this union, to say it is good, to promise our support when times are difficult, as times always become. He took the eagle feather from Naira's hand and the one from his own hair, bound them together with sinew. 2 feathers, 2 lives, bound but not imprisoned, strong together but each still able to fly. He handed the bound feathers back to Naira and Ezra together. "This is my blessing. May your days be long and your troubles be small." Reverend Whitmore smiled. "By the power vested in me by the state of Tennessee, and by God Almighty, I declare you husband and wife. Ezra, you may kiss your bride." Ezra leaned in, and Naira met him halfway. The kiss was gentle and full of promise. When they pulled apart, The clearing erupted in applause and cheers. Mrs. Jennings was crying happy tears. Sam Porter was grinning like he'd personally arranged the whole thing. Even Marshall Hayes, a man not known for displays of emotion, looked pleased. The celebration that followed lasted until well after dark. Someone produced a fiddle. Someone else had a squeeze box. Music filled the clearing, and people danced, their shadows long in the firelight. Food was shared. Stories were told. Laughter rang out against the ancient mountains that had seen so much sorrow and now witnessed joy. Late in the evening, Ezra and Naira slipped away from the celebration. They walked to the ridge behind the cabin where Sarah and the baby were buried under the dogwood tree. Naira had asked to see it weeks ago, and Ezra had shown her without reservation. Some things needed to be acknowledged, not hidden. They stood there together, and Ezra spoke to the graves like he'd done 1,000 times before. But this time, it was different. "Sarah, I want you to meet Naira. She's my wife now. I hope that's okay. I hope you understand that this doesn't mean I forgot you. Doesn't mean I stopped loving you. Just means I learned it's possible to hold old love and new love in the same heart without one diminishing the other." Naira knelt, placed her hand on the earth above the graves. "Sarah, mother of a son who never breathed, I promise to honor your memory, to care for the man you loved, to make sure he knows that living fully is not betraying the dead. It is honoring them." They stayed there a while longer, then walked back to the cabin hand in hand. The celebration was winding down. People were gathering their things, preparing for the journey home. But before they left, each one stopped to offer congratulations, to press gifts into Naira's hands, to shake Ezra's hand or clap him on the shoulder. "You did good," Sam Porter said quietly. "Did real good." When everyone had finally gone and it was just the two of them again, Ezra and Naira stood in the clearing, looking at their cabin, their home, the place they would build their life together. "Are you happy?" Ezra asked. Naira thought about the question, giving it the weight it deserved. "I am not the same person I was when you found me tied to that tree. That person was broken and angry and saw only endings. Now I see beginnings. I see possibility. I see a future I want to live." She turned to face him. "Yes, I am happy. Not because everything is perfect, but because everything is real, and real is enough." They went inside, and Naira immediately went to the fireplace, reaching up to touch the Sharps rifle mounted there. Her father's gift. The thing that had caused so much trouble and ultimately brought so much good. "I used to think this rifle was everything," she said softly. "My father's last words to me. His legacy. The only thing worth fighting for." She turned back to Ezra. "But I was wrong. The rifle is not the legacy. The legacy is what my father tried to teach me through making it. That beauty matters. That craftsmanship matters. That taking time to do something right matters. That honor is worth fighting for even when fighting costs everything." She moved to the window, looked out at the mountains dark against the starlit sky. "He also taught me that we honor the dead not by clinging to what they left behind, but by living the values they tried to instill, by being worthy of their sacrifice." Ezra came to stand beside her. "What would your father think of all this? Of you marrying a white mountain man? Of building a life so different from the one he knew?" "I think he would see that you cut me down when you could have walked away. That you stood between me and men who wanted me dead. That you asked for nothing in return except the chance to do what was right." She smiled. "My father valued honor above all else. You are an honorable man, Ezra Blackwood. He would have liked you, would have called you friend." "And your mother? What would she think?" "My mother believed the world was larger than the boundaries we draw. That love was stronger than tradition. That sometimes the best way to honor where you come from is to be brave enough to go somewhere new." She took his hand. "She would have told me to hold tight to you, to not let fear or custom or other people's expectations stop me from claiming happiness." They stood together in the quiet, in the home they'd built and would continue building every day forward. Outside, an owl called. Inside, the fire crackled. And two people who'd been lost found themselves, finally, exactly where they were meant to be. The next morning, Naira woke early as she always did. She dressed quietly, not wanting to wake Ezra, and stepped outside into the cool dawn. The world was fresh and new, washed clean by a light rain that had fallen sometime in the night. She walked to the garden she'd been tending, knelt in the damp earth, and began the work of coaxing life from soil. Behind her, she heard the cabin door open. Ezra emerged, hair still mussed from sleep, and came to join her. He knelt beside her without speaking, and together they worked. This was marriage, Naira thought. Not the ceremony or the words spoken before witnesses. This. Two people working side by side, building something together, facing the same direction, invested in the same future. This was home. Not a place, but a person. Not walls, but connection. Not safety, but the willingness to be vulnerable with someone who'd earned the right to see you whole, scars and all. This was the legacy her father had really left her. Not a rifle, but the knowledge that some things were worth fighting for. That honor mattered. That beauty could exist even in the hardest circumstances. And that love, real love, was possible even after loss had tried to convince you otherwise. The sun rose higher, warming the earth beneath their hands. And in the distance, barely audible over the sound of morning birds, came the echo of church bells from Gatlinburg, ringing out across the valleys, marking the hour, celebrating the day, celebrating two lives joined, two communities united, two people who'd walked through fire and chose to keep walking together into whatever came next. The Widow's Rifle, Part 6. 6 months after the wedding, autumn painted the Smokies in colors so vivid they seemed unreal. The maples blazed red and gold, the oaks turned deep burgundy. The mountains looked like they were on fire, but it was the kind of fire that warmed rather than destroyed, the kind that reminded you that endings could be beautiful too. Ezra and Naira had fallen into rhythms that felt ancient, like they'd been living this way for decades instead of months. She taught him the medicinal properties of mountain plants he'd walked past his whole life without seeing. He taught her to read animal signs, to predict weather by watching how the smoke moved from their chimney. They were making something new from their different traditions, keeping what mattered and letting go of what didn't. The cabin had truly become a home now. Naira's beadwork hung on the walls alongside Ezra's hunting trophies. Her herbs dried from the rafters. His tools hung orderly on pegs she'd carved. The Sharp's rifle still held its place of honor above the fireplace, but it had been joined by something else. A photograph in a simple wooden frame. Marshall Hayes had arranged for a traveling photographer to come through Gatlinburg, and Ezra had surprised Naira by taking her down the mountain for a sitting. The photograph showed them standing in front of the cabin. Ezra in his best shirt, beard trimmed, looking uncomfortable but determined. Naira in her doe-skin dress, one hand resting on Ezra's arm, the other holding that bound eagle feather Red Cloud Walker had given them. Behind them, barely visible, the Sharp's rifle on the wall, a symbol of everything they'd fought for and won. On a crisp October morning, they were preparing to make the journey down to Gatlinburg for the autumn market when they heard horses. Multiple horses, coming fast. Ezra's hand went to his rifle. Naira moved to the window, peering through the gap in the shutters they kept partially closed these days. You could never be too careful. Silas Crow might be in prison, but a man like that had friends, people who owed him favors or money or both. But the rider who emerged first into the clearing made Naira gasp. She pulled open the door and ran outside before Ezra could stop her. "Kai, Running Deer," she called out. The young Apache warrior pulled his horse to a stop. He looked different than the last time they'd seen him. Thinner, older somehow, though only months had passed. His eyes carried the weight of hard lessons learned. Behind him rode two others Ezra didn't recognize. One was an Apache woman, maybe 50 years old, with gray threading through her black hair. The other was a white man, late 20s, dressed like a city person but sitting his horse well enough to suggest he'd spent time in rough country. Kai dismounted slowly, hands visible and away from any weapons. "Naira Swiftwater, Ezra Blackwood, I come with respect and with need. May we speak?" Ezra came out of the cabin, rifle in hand, but pointed at the ground. "Depends on what you need to speak about. About justice, about honor, about doing what is right even when it is hard." Kai gestured to his companions. "This is Morning Star. She is a healer among our people. And this is Thomas Brennan. He is an investigator for the Bureau of Indian Affairs." The white man dismounted, pulled documents from his saddlebag. "Mr. Blackwood, Mrs. Blackwood, I apologize for arriving unannounced, but we have a situation that requires immediate attention, and Kai Running Deer suggested you might be willing to help." "Help with what?" Naira asked. Thomas Brennan spread the documents on the rough wooden table Ezra brought outside. Maps, reports, photographs. 6 weeks ago, a young Cherokee woman named Sarah Cryingbird disappeared from her home near the North Carolina border. She's 20 years old, unmarried, last seen walking home from helping a neighbor with their harvest. He pointed to one of the photographs. A young woman with kind eyes and a shy smile. 3 days after she vanished, her family received a letter demanding $500 for her safe return. But here's where it gets complicated. The letter was signed by someone claiming to be William Crow, Silas Crow's younger brother. Ezra felt ice form in his gut. Silas Crow is in prison. He is, but he has family, and apparently they're not happy about what happened to their brother. William Crow has been making noise about revenge, about how the Apache and the mountain people who testified against Silas need to be taught a lesson. Brennan pulled out another document. 2 weeks ago, another woman disappeared. Apache, from a different band, same pattern, letter demanding money, signed by William Crow. "Why come to us?" Ezra asked, though he thought he already knew the answer. Kai spoke up then. "Because you stopped Silas Crow when everyone else was afraid. Because you proved that standing against evil is possible. Because I was a fool who followed the wrong man, and I am trying to make amends." His voice carried shame and determination in equal measure. "Morning Star is Sarah Cryingbird's aunt. The Bureau sent investigator Brennan, but he cannot search Cherokee or Apache lands without permission from the tribal councils, and the councils are afraid that if they help, more women will disappear." Morning Star stepped forward then. Her English was halting but clear. "My niece, good girl, kind heart, never hurt anyone. Now she is somewhere scared and alone because bad men think they can take our daughters and we will do nothing." She looked directly at Naira. "You know what it is to be taken, to be left to die. You survived. Please, help me find my Sarah." Naira looked at Ezra. He saw the conflict in her eyes. They'd built peace here, safety, a life without constantly looking over their shoulders. Getting involved meant risking all of that, meant walking back into danger when they'd finally escaped it. But he also saw something else in her expression. Recognition. The knowledge that sometimes you can't stay safe when others are suffering. That having survived obligates you to help others survive too. "We'll help," Ezra said. Then he looked at Naira. "If you agree, this is your choice as much as mine. My father used to say that honor is like a fire. It requires fuel. If we let it die because we are comfortable, we lose the right to call ourselves honorable." She turned to Morning Star. "We will find your niece, and we will make William Crow regret following his brother's path." Thomas Brennan looked relieved. "Thank you, both of you. I've been assigned to this case, but I'm one man with limited authority. Having locals who know the territory and have the respect of both communities, that changes everything." They spent the next hour going over what was known. William Crow had been working with his brother for years, handling the more violent aspects of the gun-running operation. While Silas was the businessman, William was the enforcer, the one who made examples of people who didn't pay, who made sure debts were collected and resistance was crushed. After Silas went to prison, William had gone quiet, disappeared. Most people assumed he'd fled west or south, somewhere beyond the reach of Tennessee law, but instead, he'd been planning, building, getting ready to strike back at everyone who'd hurt his brother. "He's not just after money," Brennan explained. "The ransom demands are a cover. What he really wants is revenge. He wants to hurt the people who testified against Silas, wants to prove that standing up to the Crows has consequences." "How many men does he have?" Ezra asked. "Unknown. At least 5, possibly more. He's been recruiting from the worst elements. Outlaws, deserters, men who enjoy hurting people." Brennan pulled out another map. "We think he's operating out of somewhere in the Nantahala Range. Remote, defensible, close enough to Cherokee and Apache settlements to strike fast and retreat before anyone can respond." Kai added, "I have been tracking them for 2 weeks. I found signs. Camps that were abandoned quickly. Trails that lead into the deep forest and disappear. They are careful, but they are not invisible." "When do we leave?" Naira asked. "Dawn tomorrow," Brennan said. "That gives us time to prepare, to gather what we need." He looked at them seriously. "I won't lie to you. This is dangerous. William Crow is worse than his brother. Silas was evil, but it was cold evil, business evil. William enjoys causing pain. The women he's taken, we have to assume the worst." "Then we move fast," Ezra said. "We find them, we get the women out, and we end this before anyone else disappears." That night, Ezra and Naira prepared. They checked weapons, packed supplies, laid out their warmest clothes. The Nantahala Range was higher and colder than the Smokies. November was coming, and with it, winter's first real teeth. As they worked, Naira spoke quietly. "Are you afraid?" "Terrified," Ezra admitted. "Not for me, for you, for what might happen if this goes wrong." "I am afraid too, but I remember being tied to that tree, remember thinking I would die there and no one would know the truth, no one would speak for me." She touched the Sharps rifle hanging above the fireplace. "Those women are tied to their own trees right now, different trees but just as deadly. If we do not cut them down, who will? Red Cloud Walker, Kai, Brennan, good people willing to stand up." "Yes, but we started this. When you cut me down that day, you sent a message that some people will not walk past suffering, will not look away when evil demands to be confronted. We have to finish what we started." She was right, Ezra knew. Ezra. This was the cost of having stood up once. It meant you'd be asked to stand up again, and again, until either the evil was defeated or you fell. There was no middle ground, no going back to a simple life once you'd drawn a line and said this far and no further. They made love that night with an intensity born of uncertainty, of knowing that dawn might lead to endings neither of them wanted to face. Afterward, they lay tangled together, and Ezra traced the scars on Naira's wrists where the ropes had cut deep all those months ago. "When this is over," he said, "we're going to build that addition we talked about, the one with the big windows facing east, so we can watch the sunrise together." "When this is over," Naira agreed, "and we will plant apple trees, like my father had when I was a child, so our children, if we are blessed with them, can climb in the branches and feel safe." "Children," Ezra repeated, the word strange but good in his mouth. He'd given up on that dream when Sarah died, but here it was again, offered back by a woman who'd walked through fire and refused to be consumed by it. "Yes, children, a family, a future." She kissed him softly. "But first, we save Morning Star's niece. We stop William Crow. We finish this." Dawn came cold and gray, with frost on the ground and their breath visible in the air. The group assembled in the clearing, Kai and Morning Star, Thomas Brennan, and to everyone's surprise, Red Cloud Walker, looking ancient and determined. "You did not think I would let you go without me," the old man said. "I am too old to fight, but I am not too old to bear witness, and someone must make sure the story is told true when this is over." They rode out as the sun was breaking over the eastern ridges, turning the frost to diamonds. 7 people on a mission that had only one acceptable outcome. Find the women. Stop William Crow. Make sure evil learned that actions have consequences. The trail led south and east, following Kai's signs and Brennan's intelligence. They moved fast but careful, knowing that Crow would have scouts out, that riding into an ambush would end this before it started. 2 days into the journey they found the first real evidence, a camp abandoned in haste, but not before someone had carved words into a tree. "Come, find them if you dare. W.C." And below that, an arrow pointing deeper into the mountains. "It's a trap," Brennan said flatly. "Of course it is," Ezra agreed, "but we're going anyway, because that's what he's counting on, that we care more about those women than we do about staying safe." They followed the arrow, followed it through terrain that grew rougher and more isolated, through ravines where an ambush would be easy, along ridges where a single shot could send you tumbling to your death. They moved like they were walking through a minefield, because in a way they were. On the 3rd day, they found the cabin. It sat in a hollow so remote that sunshine probably only reached it a few hours each day, built from rough logs with bars on the windows and heavy timber across the door. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, and outside, standing casual and confident, were 4 men with rifles. William Crow was easy to spot. He looked like his brother, but harder, meaner. Where Silas had the appearance of a businessman, William looked like exactly what he was, a thug with delusions of importance. "Well, well," he called out as Ezra's group came into view. "The mountain hermit and his Apache bride. Heard you 2 were the reason my brother is breaking rocks in a prison quarry. Thought I'd return the favor." "Where are the women?" Naira demanded. "Safe and sound, for now. But here's the thing. You want them back, you're going to have to trade." He smiled, and it was like watching a snake prepare to strike. "My brother for your lives. Simple exchange. You die, Silas goes free." "That's not how the law works," Brennan said, his badge visible on his coat. "Law?" William laughed. "Law is what powerful people say it is. And right now, I'm the most powerful person in this hollow. I've got 2 innocent women, I've got men with rifles, and I've got absolutely nothing to lose." He raised his voice. "So here's my final offer. The Apache woman and the mountain man walk forward unarmed. My men shoot them dead. Everyone else rides away. The women get released tomorrow. Or we do this the hard way, and everybody dies, including Sarah Crying Bird and her friend." Morning Star made a sound like something breaking inside her. Red Cloud Walker put a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. Ezra looked at Naira, saw in her eyes the same calculation he was making. Could they trust Crow to keep his word? No. Would he kill the women anyway once he'd killed them? Probably. Was there any scenario where walking forward unarmed ended in anything but death for everyone? Not a single one. "We need a 3rd option," Ezra said quietly to Brennan. "I'm working on it," the investigator replied. Then louder to Crow, "Give me a minute to consider your offer." "You got 30 seconds, Crow called back. "Then I start putting bullets through the cabin walls. See how lucky those girls feel." That's when Kai Running Deer did something nobody expected. He stood up in his stirrups and shouted in Apache, loud, clear, a message that carried across the hollow. From the tree line on 3 sides of the cabin, Apache warriors appeared. 20 of them, maybe more. They'd been there the whole time, hidden, waiting, tracking Kai's signs the same way he'd tracked Crow. William Crow's smile vanished. His 4 men raised their rifles but didn't fire. They were outnumbered 5 to 1, and they knew it. "Seems like the math just changed," Brennan called out. How about a counteroffer? You release the women unharmed, surrender yourself and your men, and maybe you see a courtroom instead of a noose. Because I guarantee, if those women have been hurt, there's not a judge in Tennessee who'll show mercy." For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the door to the cabin opened. A figure appeared. Not William Crowe, but one of his men, younger, scared. "She's shot," he called out. "One of the girls is shot. She needs a doctor or she's gonna die." Morning Star screamed. Naira was off her horse and running before anyone could stop her. Ezra cursed and ran after her, expecting bullets to cut them both down. But no shots came. Instead, William Crowe stepped aside and Naira pushed past him into the cabin. Inside, in the dim light filtering through barred windows, two young women sat huddled against the far wall. One was unconscious, blood spreading across her shoulder from a wound that looked recent. The other, terrified but defiant, was trying to stop the bleeding with strips torn from her dress. "Sarah?" Naira asked. "I'm Sarah," the conscious girl said. "This is Willow. He shot her this morning when she tried to run." Her voice broke. "I couldn't stop the bleeding. I tried, but I couldn't." Naira knelt beside Willow, checked the wound. It was bad. The bullet had gone through, which was good, but she'd lost a lot of blood. Without treatment soon, she'd go into shock and die. "Morning Star!" Naira shouted. "I need you, now!" The older woman was inside seconds later, her medicine bag already open. She and Naira worked together, their hands moving with practiced efficiency, cleaning the wound, packing it with herbs that would stop infection and promote clotting, binding it tight. All while Ezra stood in the doorway, his rifle trained on William Crowe, who watched with an expression that might have been regret or might have been calculation. Outside, the standoff continued. 20 Apache warriors with arrows nocked, 4 outlaws with rifles, Thomas Brennan with his badge and his authority, and somewhere in there, the question of whether this would end in more blood or injustice. It was Red Cloud Walker who broke the deadlock. He rode forward slowly, his hands visible and empty, stopped 10 feet from William Crowe. "Young man," he said, his voice carrying the weight of 7 decades, "your brother made choices, evil choices. He paid for them, as he should. Now you are making choices. You can add to your brother's evil, become a man known for hurting innocent women, or you can stop, right now, choose differently, face justice with whatever dignity you have left." "Justice," William spat the word. "There's no justice. There's just power. And right now, I don't have enough of it." "Then we are agreed," Red Cloud said calmly. "You have lost. The question is whether you lose with honor or without it. Whether you are remembered as a man who became a monster or a man who made mistakes but had the courage to stop making them." William Crowe's hand moved toward his pistol. 20 Apache bows drew back in perfect unison, arrows aimed at his heart. The sound of 20 strings creaking tight filled the hollow. "Boss," one of his own men said, voice shaking, "it's over. I ain't dying for your brother's revenge." Another nodded, slowly raising his hands. "Me neither." The professional gunfighter, blood still seeping through the bandage on his leg, looked at the Apache warriors and carefully laid his weapon down. "I'm out." William stood alone, outnumbered, abandoned by his own men. He looked at the cabin door where Willow was being carried out on a stretcher, pale and barely conscious. Something in his face cracked. "I didn't mean for that," he said, and his voice had lost all its swagger. "I just wanted them scared. I swear I didn't mean—" "But you did," Red Cloud said quietly. "Intentions do not erase consequences. You shot a girl who tried to run. Now you face what that means." For a long time, William Crowe's jaw worked, hands opening and closing at his sides. Then, very slowly, like a man accepting his own death, he unbuckled his gun belt, let it fall to the ground. "Stand down," he called to his remaining men, voice hollow. "It's over." One by one, the outlaws lowered their weapons, raised their hands, let themselves be surrounded by Apache warriors who looked like they'd rather put arrows through them but would settle for justice instead. Thomas Brennan moved in, snapping irons on wrists, reading rights that probably didn't mean much to men like these, but mattered anyway because law had to mean something, or it meant nothing. Inside the cabin, Willow opened her eyes, looked at Morningstar and Naira working over her. "Am I dead?" she whispered. "No," Naira said firmly. "You're alive, you're safe, and you're going home." They carried Willow out on a stretcher fashioned from pine branches and blankets. Sarah walked out on her own power, her head high despite everything she'd endured. When she saw her aunt, she ran to her, and Morningstar caught her, held her, whispered prayers of gratitude in Cherokee. The journey back took 4 days because they moved slow, careful of Willow's wound. But she survived. Morningstar's medicine and Naira's care saw to that. By the time they reached the Cherokee settlement, she was sitting up, eating solid food, and already planning how she'd tell the story of her rescue. William Crow and his men were turned over to federal authorities. The trial was set for spring. Everyone knew how it would end. With rope or prison, it didn't much matter. Either way, the Crow family's reign of terror in the Tennessee mountains was finished. A week after they returned home, Ezra and Naira stood on their porch watching the first snow of winter dust the peaks. They'd been through so much, lost so much, found so much, and somehow, impossibly, they'd come out the other side still standing. "Do you think it's really over?" Naira asked. "Or will there be another evil waiting? Another fight we'll be asked to join?" "Probably," Ezra said honestly. "Evil doesn't quit just because good wins once. But neither do we. We keep standing, keep fighting, keep trying to make the world a little less dark." She leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "My father would say that is the definition of honor. Not winning every battle, but never surrendering. Never letting evil go unchallenged, even when challenging it costs everything." Smart man, your father. He was, and he would be proud of us, of what we've built here, of who we've become. She looked up at him. "Are you ready to start that addition, the one with the windows facing east?" "I am." "And the apple trees?" "Those too, because we're going to need shade for those children to play in." Ezra smiled, really smiled, for what felt like the first time since Sarah died all those years ago. "Then let's start tomorrow. Start building the future we fought so hard to make possible." They went inside, closed the door against the cold. Above the fireplace, the Sharp's rifle caught the lamplight, its carved eagles seeming almost alive in the dancing shadows. A reminder of everything that had been, a promise of everything yet to come. And in the silence of the mountain night, if you listened close, you could almost hear it. The sound of 2 hearts beating in time. The sound of a home filled with love instead of loneliness. The sound of a future being built one day, one choice, one act of courage at a time. This is what honor looks like. This is what love makes possible. This is what happens when good people refuse to look away from evil. This is the story of the widow's rifle, and the mountain man who gave her back her voice, and the life they built together from the ashes of what they'd lost. And it is true.